This is Pluralist Video, and in this presentation I'm going to be talking about the first 4 books of Outlander and the first 4 seasons of Outlander on television. The artwork of these book covers is from before the television series, and it does suggest how they imagined the characters to appear. In fact, I first encountered Outlander on the television when it was shown in 2017 on More 4, a minor television station within the Channel 4 stable. At first, I watched it fairly irregularly, and I thought it was rather interesting. And first impressions were how well it captured the essence of historic rural Scotland. People might remember in the first series Claire on the trip gathering the rent from the Mackenzie lands, when she joined some women walking the wool or cleansing the cloth to eliminate oils, dirt and other impurities. That was incredibly authentic. I watched the programme more often as it went along, and then in 2018 I watched the second series all the way through. That was also on More 4. And when it finished in September 2018, I went out to a shop and I bought the first 3 seasons on DVDs. And the first thing I did was watch season 3. And for the first 8 episodes, we had an interesting drama of the main protagonists Claire and Jamie's separation and the document search that led Claire to go back in time and reconnect with Jamie after 20 years of separation. And then suddenly it all went wrong. They went on a bizarre trip to the West Indies full of coincidences and ended up in America, where season 4 was located. Now, I can't understand why, after Jamie was pardoned of all his crimes at Hellwater, that he went back into a life of crime as discovered by Claire in Edinburgh. There was plenty of history left once he'd survived at Culloden. As a minor laird, even alongside his sister and brother-in-law, Jamie could have shown how the lairds moved from feudal to capitalist owners, first trying to prevent the labour force from leaving the land, and later on forcing the workers off the land and to go abroad. Nevertheless, we must deal with the seasons that exist and not the ones we think could have existed, and indeed the books as they are. I'm not myself into writing alternative fan fiction. I have my own writing project than going around interfering with the ideas and effort of someone else, especially the success generated by Diana Gabaldon. Sex and indeed sexual violence are significant parts of the Outlander story. Here are my paintings of the more consensual scenes between Jamie and Claire. Don't you think that the book's structure is quite peculiar? The first book doesn't quite finish its story at the end. and you have to go on to book 2. But then book 2 puzzles many people because it starts in 1968 and it finishes in 1968, although the main story doesn't make it to 1968. In fact, to get there, you have to go to book 3. And book 3 is really 2 books, because the second part is where they take the journey to the West Indies and eventually to America itself. Book 4 seems to be a book that's self-contained, except that it finishes with a gathering, and that gathering continues in book 5. Book 5 has this apparent innovation of nearly 237 pages, all on one day, as if James Joyce had never written Ulysses. The television series tried to copy the book structure, except it couldn't, because when it started season 2, it did so in 1948 rather than 1968. And in fact, it becomes possible to watch and get everything in date order. But if you don't do that, everything can seem to be out of place. Season 2 then finishes in both 1746 and 1968, and after this, Season 3 goes back a bit so that we run up to and include 1968. It's Claire's story in the main, and the first 2 books use the first person point of view, although in later books this becomes mixed up with the third person point of view and can be quite confusing. We never get a deep psychological view of Claire. We don't know, for example, if she's trapped in the past in the early days and shows symptoms of Stockholm Syndrome. We never see Roger the historian excited to be in the past. We don't get Brianna producing engineering solutions until much later on. Indeed, the television season 4 shows her as being somewhat stupid as she goes back in time. Television corrects the shallow portrayal of Frank in the books. Claire was with him for 20 years, and yet he's reduced to some passing italics in Book 3, Voyager. We have a problem with Outlander concerning dates and geography, and it starts with Book 1. Now, there is a British version of Book 1 where the initial date for the second honeymoon is moved to 1946 from 1945, deemed to be a better year for a second honeymoon after the Second World War. The effect of this, given that all the other books are the American versions, is that these books as a series are out of sync. Now you can kind of accept that, but what you can't accept are the errors that take place in the books, and the most significant one of these must be Dougal's reveal to Claire later on in the book when he says 1967, which Claire understands that Galis came through the stones herself in 1967. Problem is that in all subsequent books and throughout the television series, the date is 1968. Now, if this was a problem of the British book, then the date would have been 1969. But it's not. The problem is in all versions of the book. This is really important because Book 2 starts in 1968 and ends in 1968. The second problem is that the geography is shifted in the British version of the book because we are supposed to understand the British Isles better than the Americans, and therefore the Circle of Stones is much nearer Inverness. But there are all kinds of storytelling results of that shift, particularly when Claire is rushing towards the Circle of Stones, where in the British version all she can do is run along the line of the Great Glen rather than run towards the stones. This is the real life Craignadoon notice. It's located at Dunalister Water near to Kinloch Rannoch. Sometime around 3000 before the Common Era, or 5000 years ago, in the British Isles, there was a kind of reformation in ancestor worship. And that was the adoption of wood or stone into circles connected with solar, lunar or stellar events in the cycle of the year. Now, one place this did not happen was among the native Indians of North America. So the discovery of a stone circle in North Carolina could not have taken place. This is prehistory-like and not prehistory. It is a plot convenience so that the characters don't have to keep crossing the Atlantic Ocean in order to go backwards and forwards in time. And it also allows time travellers to appear. Has anybody noticed the editing mistake in Book 1, Outlander or Cross Stitch, where Claire goes to the stones on a bicycle and then she disappears back in time? Later on, all further mentions in the books are that she went by car. The witch's trial in the book takes place outside, and there's a note at the back of the book that says they stopped in 1722. Well, that's fine. A fiction book is entitled to have whatever scenario it wants. This isn't history, it's history-like, it's fine. But the television people discovered that there were no more witches' trials, and so they decided to try and sort it out when they didn't need to. So they held an unofficial witches' trial inside a chapel, and they did up the chapel, except they gave it a coloured window, and at that time of the Reformation, there would be no coloured windows. There would be plain windows, and it would be plain inside throughout. From across the chapel, with her fantastic eyesight, Claire can spot the scar from the smallpox vaccination on Gaelis's arm. And Claire is then rescued by Jamie. She goes off to the woods. She knows that Gaelis also came back in time. She then declares to Jamie that she herself came back in time from 1945. Bonnie Prince Charlie, a Roman Catholic, but who had to deal with religion in Scotland as he found it. First of all, we consider Father Bain as the Roman Catholic priest of the village of Cranesmuir, close by to Castle Leoch. But in 1743, we are some 200 years into the Scottish Reformation. Maybe there were about 20,000 Catholics left. Catholicism for them was a private faith. There were priests, of course, but they moved from house to house and they were hidden from the authorities. There were definitely no Catholic parishes, not even in the most Catholic of islands. And this situation lasted there until around 1870, some 10 years before legalisation. Back at the Restoration of 1660, the Church of Scotland took on bishops again, but in 1690 they were gone for good. And this was the origin of both the Church of Scotland without bishops and the Scottish Episcopal Church. The church with bishops was a non-juror church, one that refuses to swear a particular oath. And it most suited the Jacobites, although probably most Jacobites were Presbyterian. And even the disloyal Episcopal Church in the 1740s was reduced to 4 bishops and about 40 priests. Gradually, the Episcopal Church became more loyal to the Crown and was able to recover and grow. And the Jacobites were only one part of the Scottish population. Their battle was as much a dispute within Scotland as between the British and the local Scottish population. Many Scots regarded the Jacobites as backward politically. And this division brings me to a related point, misrepresented in the earlier books and television seasons. The people Claire and Gaelis join speak Gaelic. Jamie Fraser uses short, pithy phrases to Claire and later to Brianna. But when speaking in English, he and his associates are portrayed using Scots phrases, such as "Dear Ken," rather tediously. This is simply wrong. The ethnic group that spoke Gaelic spoke a good English. If you consider it, they had to think their use of this second language, and it would have been careful and precise. To the 1940s, and the Reverend Reginald Wakefield is part of the Church of Scotland. I reacted when I read that he had a bishop. No, he did not. Certainly not. That was the point. geography and distance are problems for Outlander. If we take the journey made from Ardmere Prison to Hellwater with relatively few overnight stops, that is an enormous distance to travel with the governor on horseback and Jamie having to walk behind attached to chains. I mean, it's simply not realistic in any sense. And in the books, the stones that Claire and Gaelis travel through seem to shift around somewhat. I mean, at some times they're a distance for Claire to travel from between them and Inverness, and yet at other times we learn that they're quite close. For example, Roger, when he was a school child, used to go to the Stones in his dinner hour and meet the girls. So, which is it? Now, the television series managed to keep the Stones in one place. That is, until season 4, where in season 4, Brianna went through the Stones and her map showed them to be some 50 miles further to the east. Whereas Roger, more or less at the same time, went through those Stones and popped into Inverness. Now the reason they moved the Stones for Brianna was because she was on a walking journey to go to Ayr. Now why on earth would anybody from there want to walk all the way to Ayr, which is an enormous distance? And so, again, it's just not practical. It makes it very unrealistic. The outlandish companion map is very strange. In fact, in places, it's factually incorrect. So I created an alternative, which I think is more in keeping to the novels and the television series. This is an extract from the letter sent by the Reverend Reginald Wakefield to Frank Randall that accompanied what became Frank Randall's possession of the obituary notice, and it was seen by Brianna in that scene where she psychologizes her father. This was one example of who got to see the obituary notice. In the 4th book, the obituary notice that sends Brianna back in time and has Roger chasing her is quite well concealed. But in the television series, it seems that everyone and their dog has got a copy of the obituary notice. And that raises a question: why, in previous seasons, when they were doing document searches, they didn't find it? Of course, if they had found it, not only would it have shown that Jamie Fraser was still alive after Culloden, but that Claire went on to meet him and die with him. It was written for Series 4 with insufficient thought about the consequence for previous series. And also a problem in Season 4 is Lizzie. Now in the book, Lizzie is a child and she has malaria. But in the television series, malaria gets mentioned a few times, but it's not obvious, and she's an aware adult. And so it becomes very strange that over months, Lizzie and Brianna didn't have a simple conversation that would have resolved the question about who was the man that Brianna met outside the pub viewed by Lizzie. She thought he was the rapist. But it would have been very simple for Brianna to tell her that he was, in fact, the man she married. Simple conversations that resolve plots are called idiot plots when they don't take place. And this is one whopping big idiot plot. And so it is that when Roger appears at Fraser's Ridge, he can't even speak a word to Jamie before Jamie punches him, because had he done so, that also would have resolved the plot. That's all it would have taken. In the book, there's a confusion between the surname Wakefield and Mackenzie. And it's a bit of an idiot plot itself. But that isn't even available to the television series. They're showing season 7 on television, and I've seen some reviews. I have watched season 5, but long ago decided to wait for season 7 to be sold on DVDs before buying any more, including those of season 6. However, there is a strong possibility that I won't bother to purchase anything, just as I stopped buying the books after I picked up, in a charity shop, my unread 5th book, The Fiery Cross. The reviews of the opening of season 7 are bad. The first episode was a dreadful combination of being rushed and tired at the same time. The series has gone on for far too long. It definitely needs wrapping up. In my opinion, it went wrong when it stopped being about Scotland. Some of season 7 will be about Scotland via Brianna and Roger. Brianna and Roger go through another available and rather small stone circle. In the books, they even live in Lallybroch in modern times, and then Roger goes even further back in time as characters get recycled. Season 8 has to wrap up several books and one that's not even published yet. So season 8 must be creative. The ongoing story seems to repeat itself, with all the violence and sexual violence and its general lack of direction. For example, the penultimate episode of season 5 was wasted with Brianna's many goodbyes, when nobody in fact time travelled at all. Indeed, it took a fortnight to get to those stones in the penultimate episode, but only 2 nights to return to yet another rape for the final episode. It was one more example of bad writing. I have lost confidence in the writers and producers of Outlander. Personally, I'd like to see a creative company, say organised by the BBC, remake it all, with new actors and changing the later season 3 and season 4 considerably, and finishing it off in season 5. I'd give the story a radical overhaul, leaving it in Scotland and doing some historical romance and time travel for post-Culloden in Scotland. Diana Gabaldon needs acknowledging for her good ideas and combinations of those ideas, but also recognise that the existence of huge books, one after another, is no continuous basis for filmmaking. Indeed, the filmmakers should nod at the source and essentially develop their own story. So I hope you have your own opinions. Many of you are fans of the whole of Outlander. I have to say that I started as a fan, but I wouldn't describe myself as one now. Thank you.